Hello everyone, and welcome to this Asia Edit Author Success webinar. I'm Trevor Lane, Education Consultant at Asia Edit, and in the past 25 years or so, I've taught thousands of researchers how to publish and present their research to both academic and non-academic audiences so that they can find more collaborators and consumers of their discoveries. In this webinar, I'll be sharing some tips on how to effectively present your work to multiple audiences. In this hour, we'll cover common document types for general audiences, how to promote your work, and my top tips for writing for non-academic audiences. The final 10 minutes or so will be reserved for a Q&A question and answer session when I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. To make this webinar interactive, I'll be asking you to raise and lower your virtual hand and to type responses in the chat box. But if you'd like to ask a question for the Q&A session, please do type in the question box at any time. We'll focus on non-academic texts first of all, but many of the principles in this section and throughout the webinar still apply to verbal presentations too. So let's start off by testing your typing, if you can type into the chat box, and let me know which of these research summaries you think is the most readable. So A, B, and C, type in the chat box, and if you can, also type in your reason why you think so. So A, this one, B, this one, and C, this one. Okay, so someone's typed C. Maybe tell me why you think it's the clearest or most readable. We have another C, good. Anyone for A or B? Okay, we have a lot of C's. Yes, it's more straightforward, someone says. I agree with you. So let's have a look. So A, of course, is an abstract. We're used to that. Long, continuous prose. So this could be the abstract of a paper. B is an in-brief, so it's a summary version. It's actually the same information as A, but shorter summary version. And C is a highlights or key points type of bullet point list. So it's the same information again, but it's clearer. So this is a hint for when we're presenting our work to general audiences. And in this case, actually, if we read it carefully, the B and C shorter versions actually have the same information as A, and it hasn't really simplified it anymore. It's just made it shorter, more space, more white space, maybe larger font. It's just made it more readable for the reader, but it's still quite technical. So these three versions were all found in the same journal for the same article. So journals now are doing this. They're asking for briefer versions to help their busy readers save time. But it's not necessarily less technical and easier for the public. For C, it's a whole summary of the same thing, but in 4 points. It's the 4 key sentences pulled out and modified slightly. But for example, the British Medical Journal, BMJ, will have a highlights box inside the article with just 2 questions and a few bullet points. And they ask what is known so far and what this study adds. So again, the reader has a fast way of reading the content. But again, it's for the reader of the journal. It's more for a marketing thing to get more readers. So let's have a closer look. There's the abstract, a summary version, and let's call it a significant statement. PNAS has this, so it's a shorter version. So abstract would have, it could be 1 paragraph, or it could have sections called background, method, findings and results, or conclusions, interpretation. There could be an end section of trial registration and number, the funder, any conflicts of interest. So that would be a complete abstract. And you'll see it follows the classical IMRAD, Introduction, Methods, Results, and Discussion system for abstracts and academic papers. So the summary shorter version, actually it's not shorter, it could be the same length, but simpler language. And it could have questions like, why was this study done? What did the researchers do and find? And what do these findings mean? And then the very short version could be just very brief sentences without headings, but it would follow the context and aim, the approach, a brief finding, and the main conclusion. So you don't have time for a full discussion or for all the findings. We just discuss talk about the key finding and what the conclusion is of that. So it still follows IMRAD. So this still isn't quite what we're after for writing for non-academic audiences, but it's getting a step closer. So some journals do ask for, as well as a shorter version or a summarized or simpler version, they do specifically ask for plain English or a lay version. So general language that everyone will understand. So this is a plain English abstract or summary, or plain language, or lay, or digest, or highlights. So some journals will ask for this instead. So this is going to help not only the regular reader, but other readers and non-specialists. So use simpler and plain language, shorter sentences, maybe bullet points. Simplify, define or explain any technical terms and jargon. Prefer the active voice. Make sure it's understandable by, now choose your target, whether it's going to be undergraduates and non-specialist readers, or even lower education level, high school level. Maybe it could be really the general public, people who shop in supermarkets. So choose the correct level and then aim for that. For articles in journals, it will normally be something like an undergraduate or a high schooler as the lowest level. And then it's going to be useful not just to attract more readers and to explain and summarize the research for the busy reader, but for funders and non-scientists, so future collaborators, research participants might want to know what the result was for a trial that they took part in. And then for trial registries and public versions of your work, the general public can understand what you did, and then you're expanding your audience that way. So make sure you know the difference between just a summarized version and a plain language version. And the plain language version is what we're talking about today. So here is an author and lay version summary. So without needing to read it, let's have a quick look. And I've given you some clues with the color coding. So there aren't many big words, and the big words are understandable ones like communicate, researchers, independent, organizations. So be careful of advice that says, oh, you have to always use short words, put it through the a short word tester to make sure you're having readable text. In technical articles and technical work, it's not possible to always have short words. Many academic words are long ones. So the point is to have them recognizable or as everyday as possible. So for the blue words, we can see there is a need for, so that's about the background and aim. The methods in this study we looked at, we took, we asked. So you wouldn't see took or asked in an academic version of an abstract. So the authors here really have used everyday versions of those words. We found that, so that's a clue, it's the findings or results. And this shows that is going to be the conclusions and interpretation. So put some clues in. There aren't any subheadings like a structured abstract, but there are key words like in the study, we asked, we found, and then the reader will again know which part of IMRAD you're talking about. So again, notice that even though this is a general person version of a summary, it still follows IMRAD, and it goes from the least important, which is the background, to the most important, which is the conclusion at the end. So we have this triangle shape. So bear this in mind. It's still an IMRAD version, even though it is now for the public. So the same style will be used for cover letters and grant applications and executive summaries. So this is a very, very popular style. It's a variation of IMRAD. You might be asked to supply a graphical abstract. So this is another form to simplify the work. Again, it's mainly for readers, but if you design the artwork carefully, then it could be for the general public too. So this isn't really a figure from the paper. It's a modified story like an infographic or comic. So use one diagram, preferably a new figure, designed well. Ensure there's a clear reading direction from left to right, top to bottom. Indicate the context. Is it a system? Is it a computer program? Is it a cell type? Is it in humans? Emphasize new findings without excess details from the previous literature. So it's not going to be like a full abstract or a literature review, and there shouldn't be references or things like that. So it's not really anything that you would see in an abstract or in the main text. Avoid speculation and overgeneralization. Not too much data, because this is really like a one piece cartoon, standalone figure as a graphical abstract. Minimal text, big text so you can see it. Highlight just one main thing, and nothing too distracting or cluttering. Use colors effectively, and beware of the sizing and resolution. So some journals will give you the specifications, what type of file, a TIFF file, even an MS Office file is okay. They can do the conversion. So at this point, I'd like to remind you that Asia Edit did do a free webinar on data visualization and presenting data. So I put a lot of artistic tips and technical tips in that webinar. So as well as the graphical abstract, journals would use these mechanisms to try to get more readers, it's more like a marketing thing, to get people to find the article that's relevant to them so that they will read the full version. So as I said, they might ask also for lay abstracts or summaries or just one sentence, or they could ask for an audio slides, which could be like a PowerPoint but with a voiceover, or quite sophisticated videos where you actually have a 3-minute to 10-minute video explaining your work. So you really do need a well-designed video with script, with maybe proper footage like a news story with background footage and maybe moving animation cartoon figures. So quite sophisticated, even music. So that's basically to try to expand the audience for your article and to help the busy reader. So the simpler you make it, the more understandable the abstract or the video, you can expand your audience. You want an international audience. You want more people reading your work, not just to get citations, but just also to improve the chance that your work will actually get used and noticed and used in the society. So let's have a closer look at that. The traditional way for publishing is to have an idea, apply for a grant, do the research and write it up, maybe go to a conference, get peer feedback, then write the proper paper and get it published, and then have a new idea and start again and do a new research topic. But this closed loop isn't really the point. The point isn't just to publish a lot in famous journals. So we need to consider something else, which is to promote the work, have more feedback, maybe talk to the people that you're trying to help, and that will then feed into a more useful next project, because you know what the demand is, what the end users want. And the whole point isn't just journal impact factors. There's many universities that have signed up to DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment, where the assessment now isn't where you publish, but it's how useful your work was. Have people actually used it? Have you used money wisely from your government, from the taxpayer? So it's commonly public money you've been using. So you need to promote your work to readers to get more people reading and citing, but also to share your data. And so this is to do with dissemination. It's just to widely broadcast your work. So many funders now are encouraging open access journals and open access posting of your data sets for other people to share and see your work. It's a bigger movement of knowledge exchange, where you create the work and then knowledge transfer, knowledge mobilization. You encourage people to actually use it, not just read it and cite it, but to use it and to get in touch with your stakeholders, with the people that you're trying to reach, and involve them in the next research project. Then you know it will be useful and more likely to be used the next time too. And so for planning your next project and your next funding application, the funders also want to see that you've thought about your end users and how useful your work will be. It's not just about publishing a paper. So talk to your end users, identify limitations, knowledge gaps, new research questions, problems, and pain points that you can then answer in your next grant application and your next project. And there's also an Asia Edit webinar on writing grant and research proposals. So we talk about impact and knowledge exchange there as well. So why do you have to promote your work? So some journals will do it for you, but now it's an extra skill you have to do. So as well as publishing, you have to show you've been promoting your work and getting it used. So not just academic outputs and citations, and the researcher H score is a measure of citation, how many papers you've published with how many citations. But again, that's not the point. We need non-academic usage. So try to get patents, get your work in textbooks, policies, practice guidelines, get it out into the world and actually used, and meet with your stakeholders, with your audiences. You need two-way engagement, and sometimes it's even just to help the public understand research, understand science, so good relations with the society, and get consultations with industry, new funders, network, get new collaborators. So you have to be more active after publication. So public attention too then is going to be in social media, news, stories in the national or international news. So this is something called altmetrics. I'll talk about that in a second. So finally, the whole point of promoting your research is to get it used and then to get yourself promoted. So it will help you in your future funding and career progression, put it in your CV, get awards, get prizes, but based on how useful your work was, not just how many people cited it. So for altmetrics, here's an example of a paper on COVID, and you can see that there's a donut, a multicolored donut with a number. So that's the altmetric score. So rather than the academic citation score, this is an altmetric score, and it's the public attention, not just journals, but in the wider media, social media. It's weighted for things like news and blogs and policy papers, government policies, and also then tweets and Facebook mentions. So this is the trend going forward now. So you might see this multicolored donut next to people's articles or in journal sites. So this is it's not new anymore, but you might not have seen it or noticed it. So this is the thing to aim for now. So what sites can you promote your work in for the general public? So of course, there's some logos you can recognize: Twitter, ResearchGate, so that's an academic social networking site, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Pinterest, WordPress, and other blog sites, and then websites, either your own website or your institution or department website. Then NCBI, which stands for the US National Center for Biotechnology Information. So that has a public database for genes and protein sequences, but there's many other public databases for different discipline types of data that the public can use, so data sets. So again, that's important to share your data. And then there are general repositories like Dryads, Figshare, and Zenodo, where again, you can upload your work for wider publicity, wider sharing. And here's an example of a tweet, of course. So these will then be measured by things like social engagement levels, shares, reshares, likes and comments, links and mentions, citations in policies and blogs, not articles, and the number of saves, downloads, and views. So think about this: promote your work on your own social media site or your university or department site or the department's webpage. You can just say, have you seen this? Please see my newest article. But it's better if you have a highlight sentence like we just saw, a layperson's general sentence to summarize your work. Keep it brief and not non-technical, but still accurate. It's better to have a kind of an image. Make sure it's you've checked the copyright of it, or your graphical abstract. So have some kind of a picture. Give the reference and link to your actual article for the people who care and for people to click and verify the claim you're making, and use the short URL. So you can use bit.ly or some other short URL generator to do that. And then if you're allowed, you can link to your author's accepted manuscript. So this is green open access. It's your not published yet, but it's the accepted peer-reviewed version, which some journals allow you to share publicly, but you have to check. Use the hashtag for topic links and then @ to tag people. Cross-post in different channels and different platforms of your same message and link to your paper. And you can include, mention your work in comments that you make on other people's blogs and social media posts. Watch the word count though, of course, 280 characters for Twitter. But if you have a longer, more complicated story, you can split it up and use a Twitter thread. So you just split up your story into sections. So watch out for copyright and Creative Commons CC licensing of any text or images you use, and check for conference, journal, or media embargoes. So your own work, your article, you might not be able to share it yet because there's an embargo on it. There's a date set by the journal, for example. Beware of spreading misinformation, so that's mistakes, or disinformation, which is false information on purpose, especially in these times of COVID. And don't treat preprints or other unpeer-reviewed reports as if they are peer-reviewed articles. So notice the difference. It is better to share published peer-reviewed articles. So for mass communication to reach an international audience, so as wide as possible, there are things like free blogging in Medium, or general news sites like Alert and Alpha Galileo and Science Daily, or phys.org. So here you can, usually it's through your university, they would subscribe and then they can post news to those sites and they will upload them and upload your news articles directly. Or you can buy a service and upload your work, and then Newswise, PR Newswire, some Newswire services they won't just post your work on their website, but they actually actively send your work to media, newspapers, news outlets. So they help promote your work that way and do some of the work for you, but it's at a cost. There are many other science news sites. So again, you can send your story, but then you might have to pitch it. You might have to email the right person. So it's like a submission cover letter. You'll have to convince them why they want to look at your news and publish. So of course, then there's online things like academic newspapers, The Conversation, or online Huffington Post or HuffPost. And again, you'd have to pitch your work to them as if you're approaching any news organization to convince them to pick up your news and broadcast it in their program or in their newspaper. And again, it's best to add a graphic. So let's now turn to promoting your research directly to the public. So can you type in the chat box what you think PR means in this relevant to this slide and what we're talking about now? So what does PR mean? Why do you have to do PR? Yes, public relations. Yes, public. So many of us know it as public relations. In university information officers, knowledge exchange officers, we also call it a press release. So that's a PR. Press means printing, but it's not a newspaper anymore. So in the general terms, it's called a media release or a news release. So this is like your short story, your version of the news that you send out. So as I said, some journals do it for you if you're lucky. So they want to also have people to read their journal. So they will have a press service, or your university will do it. If not, you'll have to learn to do it yourself and write your own news stories. There's also press relations, public relations. So press relations is having good relations with the media, but then public is wider. So you have good relations with the public. Some university offices do this. It could be part of their research office, external relations, community office, knowledge exchange office. PR could also mean personal relationships, positive relationships, and promoting the research, being proactive and reactive, being precise and relevant. So you're really targeting your audience and why they should read your work. So in this respect, there's many types of text, many types of documents you can use, which are geared now towards the public. So there's news and interviews, magazines and popular books, newsletters, brochures, research summaries and blogs, infographics, discussion papers, policy briefs for the government, social media, workshops, events, discussions, debates, and polls. So many types of media, and there's also audio, video, webinars you can do. So think about this, practice some skills, and convert your academic work into non-academic versions. So the point of PR, it used to be just aiming to have lots of people read your work. Nowadays, it's trying to get a network, really monitoring your work. So it's not just sending it out and praying it works. Actually, it's quite a skill to network and find the right people. So this brings us on to why we need to promote your work as part of your research career, and why you need to analyze your audience, something we call stakeholder analysis. So universities used to be just teaching, learning, and research. But now the third mission in many universities around the world, because the government will help pay and they want people to they want you to use people's money wisely. So this is the knowledge exchange or research impact to make sure that universities actually apply their research in the real world. So many governments and countries, of course, they want advanced knowledge economy. So the partnering between universities, government, and business and industry, so something called the triple helix, for collaborations to mobilize your research. A fuller version would be 4 strands, quadruple helix. Of course, we know DNA has 2, double helix, but now there's triple, quadruple. So this is universities and governments and business and directly the public, so the end users, the society. So you need to involve them too, again, to see what their needs are. And you're using public funding, so the public has a right also to be involved. And there's public things to try to educate the public too, so science festivals, public engagement. And then on a wider scale, we have countries talking to each other and using science diplomacy to solve things like global crises. Of course, we know there's climate change and COVID right now. So what is impact for research? We talked about this in the webinar on grant proposal writing. So the Hong Kong government and many governments define it as contributions and effects, positive effects for the economy, society, culture, policy, services, health, environment, or quality of life. So something useful in the real world, whether it's local, regional, or international, but it has to be beyond academia. It's not just researchers talking to other researchers and getting citations. That's not the point anymore. So stakeholder analysis means you have to look at what your advantages and benefits are of your work. Is it going to help people have better products, better practice, better policies? Is it, what sector is it? Is it the economy, the law, culture, social or environment, parts of the world? The people, so is it the general public, or is it the government sector, the NGO, non-government sector, business, charities? And then the level, is it individuals or groups or communities or whole countries? And then is it going to be a small effect, large effect, local or international? So think about the impact that your work could have, then target the audience, the users. So the users could be the immediate primary users, the people who can put your research into practice, like doctors or lawyers, but then there's the end users. It's going to be the public in the end, and you have to show whether you are improving people's lives, improving the economy, improving culture. So identify different types of stakeholder and then plot them on this 3D graph. So you have to think about the audience. Are they interested? Are they active? How much influence they have? So there's no point, for example, aiming to target the prime minister of a country with your brilliant idea, because they're going to be too busy. So you have to think about the correct procedure, the next person down. How do you target that person in their work life? There's also something in marketing called the marketing funnel. We mentioned this also in another webinar, AIDA, A-I-D-A. So awareness or attention. And then once you've got the person aware, you get them interested, and then you help them decide or desire this product, and then act and buy your product. Of course, it's also any change, any action. So a change of thinking, change of behavior, change of practice. So think of the same strategy that marketers use. Again, you can plot the people on which level of ADA they are. Are they at the awareness stage, or are they at the interested stage, or are they ready to act? And then you can push them along and supply what information they need for the right part of ADA. So again, it's not just one document and send it out to the world. You actually have to think about it. Who are you targeting? What stage are they at? How helpful will they be in using your work and pushing it to the next step to help society? So for the stakeholder impact, find people who really are interested and will support your ideas and have influence, but aren't too busy, so they're still active. So find that right blend, and for those people, then you would target the most and have high engagement, keep them engaged frequently with the information communication plan that suits them. So the types of document that they read, the language that they will understand, the context, the attitudes of that person, and then you can tailor your work and it will be more effective in having an onward effect. And then once they're at that active stage, then you can supply them with the right information, meet them in person or online, and then push them into direct action to use your research, put it into a policy, put it into practice, change something within their circle. And then in that way, it mobilizes your research. If you identify someone who isn't that interested or doesn't have that much influence, or even the general public, you then have to think of another strategy. So tailor your approach, have lower engagement, but make it more awareness raising, more general, briefer, less frequent, but then have a link for the interested people, link to more information, link to your website, link to your paper. So it's quite strategic to think about your stakeholders and how to target them. Now, for the full process of how you get from your research to having it used in the world, there's something called the logic model that goes from the inputs, so your resources, the time, the people who are on your team, then the strategy you will use, like the stakeholder analysis we spoke about. What are the outputs? So what types of reports will you tailor for them? How will you contact them? And then, so that's the outputs, but then it still has to be mobilized and used. And then there could be short-term outcomes, long-term outcomes, and then the wider impacts of society, whether it's social, economic, environmental, culture, and so on. So think of your problem at the beginning, tailor the solution, the likely solution to work, add in your assumptions, like how will it work? Who are the people you're targeting? Are they receptive to your work? Are they hostile to your work? What are the practical implications? So this is part of what's called the knowledge transfer pathway or mobilization pathway, and the risk management. So you have to also factor in the risk and alternatives to try to solve problems. So this then will translate your research work into the public and into use, but it's only what you can do. So match the audience, the format, the purpose, the style, the tone that they expect, but then you can only do so far. The action step, the mobilization step, the usage still depends on the people, whether it's your primary user or the end user. So somewhere along the line, when you're proving that your work had impact, so this is something you have to report to the government as well these days, is the impact evaluation. How is your work actually used in the world? So this is different from just saying, oh, we had lots of media mentions, or we had lots of social media mentions, or appearances in the news, or even a high altmetric score. That's not enough. That's part of the pathway, but you still need to prove it's been taken up and used by the public. So how do you communicate your research and start that pathway, the knowledge exchange, knowledge transfer pathway? Now, in the webinar on research presentations for conferences, we spoke about posters and verbal presentations at conferences. And we said that it wasn't IMRAD presentation. You're not just reading out your research paper. You have to think of it as giving the front-loaded news first. So begin your talk with the aim, your conclusion, the most important. And then you can talk about, okay, in this talk we'll cover ABC. So give the agenda. So this, again, now is the order of importance. We see it's actually the opposite of the abstract, the journal abstract. That went from least important to most important. The conclusion was last. Now we're talking about news and front-loading your information. So put the most important first. So it's an inverted pyramid. It's an upside-down triangle. And we'll see this a lot in the rest of this talk. So this is the difference between academic and non-academic reporting. So in the presentation at a conference, so this is a similar style you can use then in a public presentation to the general public, but using more understandable words. So once you've front-loaded the news, then you can give the important information of the usual IMRAD style: context, methods, results, figures, but just pick out the most important highlights, put it in understandable language, conclusion last, interpretation and implications. So this part follows IMRAD, but we did have the starting point, the inverted pyramid. So that is the beginning of the talk, to try to hook the reader, hook the audience. So you capture them and connect with the audience straight away. So it has to be something relevant to them. They're thinking, what's in it for me? Why should I care? So that's why you begin with the news first. Then they'll sit in their seats or stand by your poster and they'll listen more. So a word here that's useful is pitch. So P stands for proximity. What you present first has to be close to the reader or audience for them to care. It has an impact, so it potentially affects them or people they know, or it affects the world. It's timely. There's some kind of conflict, so it's either something we don't know yet that they want to know the answer to, or it's a debate that you're adding to. And there's a human value, human interest, so something that's relatable, emotional, something to do with everyday life that really could affect that person that you're talking to. So if you get all these elements in there, that's a good pitch. You're giving them a good preview of your story. And then the rest of that talk is not just reporting your work. It's not just a journal paper, IMRAD. You have to gain and maintain interest. And like a novel, you want to immerse the audience, so they want to keep listening. So we mentioned this in the presenting webinar. So begin with the problem statements, the exposition. So this is the orientation and the complication. What are you trying to solve? So we know the beginning of lots of stories, Frozen, Cinderella. So lots of stories, we know there's always a problem at the beginning. And then when you present your research, present it like a process that you solved something, but then you encountered a challenge and then you had to modify and do something else, or correct for something, or do another experiment. So present your work in this kind of a way until you reach the climax. So this is rising action and then falling action. So you've solved the problem because you thought of a clever way, and then everything fell into place. You give the conclusion, you give the resolution. And while you're telling your story, you've solved the problem and you've brought the audience along emotionally too, from sad to happy. Or you can also describe your group's emotion, that you were surprised at something, that you were confused at something. So tell the story in that way and you'll get more attention. And you'll notice that in the news, when the newscaster interviews somebody, they'll also talk about more of the group's feelings, that they were amazed at a result or surprised that something worked. They don't just tell the results as if it's a journal paper. So for promoting your work to the public and writing in the public style, we have the journal article, but contrast with that, we have tweets, talks, whether it's a conference or a public talk. Then hard news. So this is the news headlines. So what's the most important? So something that's very timely and impactful, compared with soft news. So this is more maybe lighthearted, but maybe more lifestyle, less important, less of an impact, but still interesting. And then there's news features, which is more like a story. And so these are different styles. So even news, there are sub-genres of news. And here we're only talking about tweets, talks, and news. Again, we saw there are many types of public writing. So newspapers, magazines, infographics, they all have different styles. It could be a complete university course for science and research communication. So we're just touching on news for today. So for journal article, we've seen in the abstract, we have the introduction, methods, results, conclusion. So it kind of follows IMRAD. And then that goes triangle, pyramid style. And then the rest looks like this. So it looks kind of like a Christmas tree because we go from introduction, which is not very important, but then telling the reader what the aim and the research question is, so it goes more important. And then we go from describing methods and results to the discussion and conclusion and implications. So again, going from less important to most important. So that follows IMRAD, and it's a Christmas tree. But we've seen with the tweets, you just give the most important news first, give a short link to your paper. So that's that's the simplest version of news. So it goes the opposite. It's most important first, and then something else. For a talk, we've just seen, so it kind of looks like a bell, maybe, looks like a Christmas bell. So it goes from conclusion at the beginning, and then the rest can follow IMRAD. It goes wider at the bottom when you talk about implications. So for hard news, by no surprise, it's going to be this version, the inverted pyramid. Most important first, give the conclusion, then you can expand, give details, give background, have a quote from one of the researchers. So why is it like this? Because for hard news, the reader, the audience, wants the news first. That's the headlines. They might not care about the rest. They don't have time. So traditionally in newspapers also, if there was no space, the editors would cut from the bottom. So you can remove the quote, you can remove the background or the tentative future speculation, remove that. You can remove more, cut the details. If there's only just 1 inch of space, just give the headline, give the most important point. So hard news is like this, why it's the most important news first. Soft news, sometimes you could begin with a little teaser or introduction saying, oh, I've got some news for you. Do you want to hear my news? Or you could say something like, oh, do you drink coffee every day? Researchers have found something that might change your breakfast habits. So it's like the teaser, but it's not the news yet, but you make the audience interested. Then you give the news as if it was hard news, conclusion, details, background, and then normally there's something more important at the end, like an implication or call to action. Remember the action item to change your lifestyle, drink more coffee, drink less coffee. So this looks like maybe a salt shaker. This one, maybe it's a artistic pepper shaker, pepper grinder. So for a news story, this is a longer one. It's more interesting. They want you to read till the end. So this is very complicated, but we'll have a quick introduction here. So the setting or the context first, a synopsis, maybe there's a summary of the story or a foreshadowing. So they'll mention something in the story because it's a little bit like a novel, a little bit like news. Teaser to make you interested. So this kind of story will be like, oh, Mrs. Wong wakes up every day. She does this. Her routine is that. And then this special day, she broke her routine. Why? So it's a very long drawn out introduction. You can give background and then somewhere further down, you give the actual news item. So if you've heard the phrase, don't bury the lead is the main news item, but in news features, they can bury the lead. Then they give details, more background, maybe give another piece of news. So it comes in little chapters. So it's like you're reading a novel. Give more details. Now the callback is if you mention something at the beginning, for example, Mrs. Wong's routine, then you can bring it back at the end and say, oh, she decided to change her routine now. Or give implications for the public, for the reader, or give a call to action for the reader to do something. So that's a news feature story. So let's now go to the actual language, the English part. How do you write your stories? So in the chat box, let me know, which do you think is the news story? Is it A or is it B? Okay, yes, A. A is a news story, and it's actually from the BBC, and B is from Nature Medicine. And we can see it's shorter, it's broken up, the sentences are shorter, the language is easier to understand just from glancing at it. So let's have a quick look. So features of news, a very short headline, easy to understand and grabbing attention. The news is first, remember? So Canadian researchers say 50% more red blood cells are destroyed in space. So FFF, findings and facts first. It's best if you can answer at least 3 of the WH questions: who, where, what, when. Usually keep the why and how for later. And then use short paragraphs. A paragraph can be just 1 sentence. Use familiar words. Use quotes from the researchers. Explain things as you go along, but in simple terms. And explain the motivation. So why did the researchers do that work? But again, very simple, and keep it relatable. So is it timely? Is it relevant? So here it says, including Britain's Tim Peake. So he must be a famous astronaut in Britain. So they mention something that people know about to get them interested. And then the teaser at the end is to make people read more, read the rest of the story. So here it says, this group, they found out more about this. So that means you want to read more. Now, how does the story end? So we want to talk about the tip. So we want the least important part, but we want to end in a good way too. So here the news people have put the source, Nature Medicine, and then they've put the most tentative part, so the future. So it may mean this, would need that, might be necessary, and then again, they say that the researchers said it. It's not the reporters saying it. So something might be necessary, the researchers say. So what did the Nature Medicine story do? That ended with red blood cell regulation demonstrated major disruptions. Hemolysis was increased by 54%. So they've put that conclusion, the same information, but they put it at the end. So now they've used the pyramid method, and then they've made it very precise and definite. So their recommendation is this should be considered. So they're saying should be considered, but the news is making it more tentative, saying, oh, it might be necessary. So different styles, different modality, and conclusion is at the end. And then remember, Nature Medicine puts the methods right at the end. So here I've put the methods at the bottom of the Christmas tree is the methods. So let's compare academic and non-academic more closely. So the formality is going to be more formal in a journal. Anemia in astronauts has been noted, so passive. The news would say space anemia is something scientists have known about since the very first missions. So very approachable language, but the same information. Personality is going to be impersonal in academia, personal in news. So these results suggest, but sometimes the authors do talk about themselves. Here we show that, but in the news story, it's going to be about the researchers, the scientists, the team. So again, the personal aspect, the emotional aspect of the research team. Technical academic work would have jargon and long technical words. Non-technical would have simpler versions. Erythrocyte destruction becomes red blood cell loss. Distant versus relatable. So something implies a compensatory increased red blood cell production. Very long words, lots of nouns. Relatable is using everyday words. Fortunately, so a little bit of emotion too. Fortunately, the body can compensate, otherwise you'd become very ill. So very easy to understand language. It's more abstract in academic work, nutritional countermeasures, whereas concrete, definite wording in the news, eat more calories for energy. Complex version is this very long version, but the simple version is a year later, they were still losing red blood cells at a higher rate. So that summarized all of that complex sentence in an approachable way. So simplicity, shorter words, shorter sentences, less flowery, very approachable, relatable language. So try to do the same thing when you're writing for the public. So also think about things that the audience can relate to. So rather than this, statistics, 30 trillion cells, 3 million base pairs, you can say something like this. If you stretched out and joined up the DNA from all your cells, it would span the solar system twice. So think of things like an Olympic swimming pool, has the same density as water, person lifting 10 horses can fill a tennis court 5 times the size of a bus. You could fit 100 on the tip of a needle, or sing happy birthday twice. Of course, that's the timing for washing your hands because of COVID. You might have to explain things more. So in a longer document, you can have a little dictionary, a glossary. But in shorter documents, you might have to explain things. So the BBC News story actually explained what red blood cells were. People might not know. So they carry oxygen and they're key to life. Or you can have a quick definition like this, comma, called hemolysis, or M dashes, longer dashes, or brackets, parentheses. So you can have a phrase like which is called, or also known as, or you can just have a very short version, just have the scientific word in brackets. Or it could be the other way around, the scientific word and then the everyday definition in brackets. So don't forget to define complicated words, but beware that the public also has a picture of a word in their mind. So for organic, they think of organic vegetables, but actually it could be organic chemistry to do with carbon. For chemicals, they think of additives and preservatives and synthesized chemicals, but actually even sugar is a chemical. So you might have to explain things or make sure they don't misunderstand these words. Stress is to do with headaches, but it could also be with stress and strain and breakage of materials. Aerosol could be ozone layer and hairspray and cans of paint, but it could also be COVID traveling in the air as small particles. Robot, people think of human-like robots, but actually it could be anything that moves and helps us, like a car manufacturing welding robot. Oversight can have 2 meanings. It can mean carefully look at something and examine and watch something, or it could be, oh, you didn't watch something and made a mistake. So these words, contronyms, can have 2 meanings. So again, make the context clear or use a different word so that the public doesn't get confused. So finally, let's end with some general tips. Do be aware of research and ethics when you write for the public. Make sure it comes from peer-reviewed sources. Use graphics, but then display your data in the best way. Get quotes from authoritative sources. No plagiarism, no bias. Declare your conflicts of interest as the authors or researchers. No exaggeration, so nothing like miracle cure. No overgeneralization, so saying always or never. Quantify things when you can, so beware of vague phrases like lots of or massive or great. And then be careful when you're being objective versus when you're giving a quote or opinion from someone. You don't have to give exact numbers, so you can round up or down if you want to, but be careful of percentages. Is it relative percent, something increased by 20%, or is it the absolute 20 percentage points, for example, an exam score increased by 20% points, or the risk. Someone's risk of a disease could increase by 10 times, but actually if the absolute risk is very small, then 10 times very small still is quite small. So you don't want to scare the public either. Don't confuse causation versus correlation, and don't confuse statistical significance with real world significance. Match the level of language to the audience and explain your technical words. Test your text with a non-specialist to make sure they understand abbreviations, idioms, and analogies, and keep everything short and simple. Use lists and headings. Be careful if you do use the you or we to make it personal, or contractions like it's, meaning it is, because some written public work still is formal, and you wouldn't say you or we, or you wouldn't say it's. So there's still different levels of formality in public written work. And then be careful of jargon and slang and colloquialisms. Sick, cool, lit can have a different meaning, meaning good. Blown away could mean blown by the wind, or it could mean blown away. I was blown away by something. I was amazed. I was shocked. And finally, for more engagement, put the front-loaded news first, and then tell a story. Think of the human angle, have a call to action at the end, and so it goes back out at the end, have implications and call to action. Use inclusive language, don't offend your audience, use the active voice if you can, and then involve the reader by asking rhetorical questions if it suits the style of the document. So you can ask, oh, here's the thing, here's what I mean, what does this mean, why is this important for us? And then that will gain the reader's attention, and then you can answer in the next part. So we have some time for questions. In this webinar, we've only skimmed the surface of different styles of non-academic texts and research promotion and plain language principles. And if you type in the question box, then I'll be happy to answer your questions. Okay, so someone's asked, is the inverted pyramid suitable for academic presentation as well? For academic presentation, yes. And so I actually showed that slide and I mentioned it in the webinar on presentations. The beginning of the presentation, whether it's a poster or a talk, can be the inverted pyramid, the news broadcast headline version, because you want to interest the audience and make them want to stay and listen for more. So definitely the inverted pyramid is better at the beginning of the talk, and then you do have to explain everything step by step, and then end with something memorable or useful at the end. So yes, you can use inverted pyramid for academic presentations. You wouldn't want to do that for the whole talk, because you're given the main talk, the main conclusion, and then you kind of filter away and there's nothing left, and then the audience will want to leave. So just use it for the beginning, and then the rest of the talk you will use the IMRAD style. But remember, you're not reporting something like IMRAD, you're telling a story. So even if you do use IMRAD style in presentations, use the storytelling style, make it sound interesting, use the emotional low and high, and talk about your team doing the work rather than just the results inside the paper. Before I said that the language for the public has to be more plain and understandable, but yes, some people might be confused because to make it more informal, but I said be careful of using words that are too informal and the contractions it's. So in some plain language movement companies that use those principles, there are companies that try to do this, but these are more service companies. So if you look at some English text of bank letters, they do actually try to keep things simple with bullet points, sections, bolded words, and then they do say you and we, and then they use direct imperative words. Don't forget, do this, do that, don't do this. And they use contractions like it's and yours. So in that industry, it's useful to do that because they're talking to customers. So be careful, because it depends on the style, it depends on the document. If it's still a formal blog site, for example, or if it's a newspaper that doesn't use contractions, then you wouldn't use contractions and go too informal, because you don't want to directly talk to the audience and start blaming them or telling them to do things. So look at some examples of the type of document you're aiming for. Do your stakeholder analysis and think of what they would expect. Would they be offended by something if it's too direct or too jokey? So be careful of cultural references or jokes and things that people might not understand all over the world. And then even if you do find a style which uses contractions, like it's, meaning it is, then be careful you don't overdo it, because there's still some rules for plain language writing when you're using contractions. So you would only use you are, your, or it is, its, but you wouldn't contract everything. For example, would have, you wouldn't say would have. So that really is speaking, and you wouldn't put everything as a contraction. So it's not straightforward for when you're trying to write for the public that way. So think about it, look for some examples, and only keep the the common words contracted, like it's and yours, and they are, there, but not would have or any complicated things like that. And even though we say try to keep it conversational, it's not really speaking. So when we speak, we say we say we change directions, we repeat, we miss things out, we say things like, you know, or like, so, and yeah. So definitely you wouldn't write that in public writing just because you think it's speaking or being casual. So not too casual, not really speaking. So what we mean by conversational is everyday words, familiar words, shorter words, and words that people would use every day, and test it with your friends and family, whether they understand the work. And what we really mean is dialogue. So it means that you think about the audience, whatever you're writing, they will understand. What will the objections they have, what will those be? What will the questions be that they have? So think about your audience as if you're talking to them, meaning two-way dialogue. So this is knowledge exchange, not the traditional just knowledge transfer. So sometimes it is being called knowledge exchange now, because it's not just one way, push out your work to the audience. It's trying to have a two-way, more sensitive, more empathetic, but also it's a dialogue. So think of public work as a dialogue. Actually, when you write academic papers too, it is a dialogue too, with the reader, with the editor, with the reviewers. So you're thinking about them while you're writing. But then for public work, you're also thinking about the style of language they use, but it's not too much like speaking. Otherwise, it's gone too casual. So I hope you found that interesting and useful. So thank you for your questions. Thank you for your time and attention. So thanks for joining us. Now the hour is up, and a recording of this webinar will be made available soon on the Asia Edit website. Meanwhile, there's also some free educational material there and the past webinars. So that's asiaedit.com. And until next time, I hope you found the tips in this webinar useful, and I wish you success and goodbye and stay safe.